With the recent issues that Facebook has seen, including its walled garden network of services like WhatsApp and Instagram, due to a DNS breach of some kind or whatever, we're seeing an unprecedented level of distrust in the big five right now. Google, WhatsApp, etc. But you know what? None of that is really actually important or even interesting right now. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's coming up for the internet as we know it. Facebook is built upon what we in the industry call Web 2.0. Web 2.0 was introduced back in the early aughts and was all about hyper-dynamic content on dynamic web pages, spread across a global, reachable infrastructure with a bigger embrace of JavaScript-controlled web pages. It certainly created a lot more work for webmasters like yours truly. Facebook is built upon what we in the industry call Web 2.0. Web 2.0 was introduced back in the early aughts and was all about hyper-dynamic content on hyper-dynamic web pages controlled by JavaScript and spread across a globally reachable infrastructure. The emphasis was on page interaction, where Web 1.0 was more about static content. You could reach a web page, but there wasn't really much you could do with it. Things like bulletin boards and forum software started introducing a lot more interactivity, user accounts, that kind of thing. I don't know. I think some people would still consider forums, at least back then, to still be considered Web 1.0 because it was still kind of an old mentality. Where Web 2.0 was all about stuff happening on the screen without refreshing the page. This was seen as really cool at the time. Certainly a lot more interesting than Web 1.0. But it came with some problems that no one could really foresee at the time. We got centralized by accident, much to the disappointment of World Wide Web creator Tim Berners-Lee. What does all this drama with Facebook right now even really mean exactly? It's more of a bigger picture thing than you might first realize. Think about your daily internet activity right now. Does it somehow involve Google, Facebook, Twitter in some way? If you haven't in a while, take a step back and do yourself a favor and look up, Facebook's portfolio of products, Google's portfolio of products, Twitter's portfolio of products. You might be shocked to see exactly how much of your daily internet life is in the hands of this very tiny few. Across the world, we're all connecting to the same platforms as each other, and while this comes with its own set of, drama and even problems, the big one I want to highlight is about what happens when that company goes down for an hour. Pandemonium. And it happens surprisingly commonly these days too. Being the big five paints a pretty big target on your back for all kinds of hackers to find exploits and even corporate hierarchy to implode on itself in some way, causes massive disruptions to the average netizen's daily routine. Let me ask you this. It's kind of impossible for it to happen, but let's humor the idea that Facebook goes bankrupt right now and goes away tomorrow forever. Scary thought? What would you do? What about the Twitter products? What about Google products? How would that affect your life? It's pretty crazy how deeply entrenched these massive entities have become in your day-to-day. What happens to your data? If Facebook stayed down right now, do you still have all the pictures, photos, videos, memes, posts, whatever at your disposal? Do you have that information backed up somewhere? I'm going to probably guess that you probably don't. If Facebook goes away, it's gone forever. Always make sure to liberate your data from Facebook and Twitter. There's a button you can do in the profile settings. I'll just say liberate your data or download your data or something like that. Click that button and download an archive of your data. It'll have everything that's important in it for you to archive on your own stuff. I would do that sooner than later, and when they do come back up, I would make it a regular habit of doing so. I'd like to take a minute to talk about what I've seen branded as Web 3.0. What is Web 3.0? It's, to my understanding, the next evolution in internet usage, where 1.0 was static, and then 2.0 was dynamic. 3.0 is about decentralization. Decentralization might sound like a scary word. Like it's what does it even mean? Well, here's the cool thing, is that the internet is inherently built to be decentralized. When the internet was created, it was designed to allow a single node, like a desktop computer tower or a laptop or something, not so much laptops back then, but like certainly now is possible, to allow a computer to be discoverable through a LAN and a WAN, so local area network and a wide area network. But if you wanted to, let's say, host some information for someone else to reach, you could simply host that on your computer tower and just on a hard drive and get an IP assigned to it, and someone in theory could get to it using some sort of browser tool. In this way, the internet was built to be decentralized already. What has happened with Web 2.0 during its long stretch of time is that we've accidentally centralized ourselves into focusing on a small handful of really big entities that basically encompass how we use the internet day to day. Decentralization is the broad stroke concept of, instead of one single source of truth, there's instead many. And it takes a lot of forms out there, but at the core of it is that no one personally owns every chunk of data in the network. Data is chunked and spread to several nodes across a vast network. Activity on the network is verified by peers instead of hired mods, and it effectively prevents a be-all end-all scenario like a Facebook or a Twitter. Decentralization comes in a lot of forms, and I'd like to focus on specifically just two of them, because I think these are the ones that are really going to matter going forward. The first one I'd like to discuss is the blockchain. You might have heard the term blockchain before. The blockchain is famous right now thanks to cryptocurrency. But the blockchain is useful for more than your standard cryptocurrency stuff. It's just most closely associated with it. Chances are pretty good you're most familiar with the blockchain in relation to something like a Bitcoin, right? A cryptocurrency. But even fewer, I'll bet, really understand what's going on, what it's doing, how it works. There's lots of videos and articles out there that can explain in much better depth of what's going on under the hood than me. But the broad stroke of it is that someone initiates a transaction. That transaction contributes to a digital block of data. And to make that activity true, a network of other peers connected to the network verify that transaction by solving a little crypto puzzle of some kind, and so long as everything is kosher and copacetic, it will be verified as true and therefore usable. There's a block. You did a thing. Here's that thing, and other things on the network need to say, hey, this is fine. This came from the right sources. We verified all the information, and everything's good to go. And then all the other all those verifiers that were capable of verifying that data, and there could be a bunch, then download that block to their own local copy of the blockchain. The blockchain, if you can imagine these blocks of data connected to other blocks of data in kind of like a chronological fashion, each verifier, or miner, if you will, requires their own copy of the blockchain. And that's kind of where the decentralized portion of it comes from. That data is not hosted in one single data center. It's hosted on several data centers, potentially across the world. So what does that mean when it comes to, let's say, a Twitter clone powered by a blockchain? The exchange of currency is simply a transaction, right? Or basically an action, boiled down. If you can imagine a post or a reply or hitting the follow button as simply a type of action taking place, it becomes fairly easy to visualize how all of this works at this point. A new post is now a record on the blockchain that gets downloaded to the verifying peers, verified, they crack a crypto puzzle, validates the record, and now it's all good. It's a truthy record. Sites might take innocent until proven guilty kind of mentality, where you can see your data right away. It looks no different to any other data across the website, but they might do something like either flag it or delete it if the content was not validated or verified by the network at some point. It really is up to the site how they want to implement that kind of thing, but that's kind of how the blockchain is working, powering these websites. These actions are verifiable transactions, and once they're verified, everything is good to go. If they're not verified, they might get flagged or deleted. It's an interesting approach to develop an application on. You will find that many blockchain-powered sites opt into deeply entrenching cryptocurrency of their own just because it seems to be, I don't know, either trendy or inherent to the technology. I haven't myself built a website powered by the blockchain, so this part I'm a little fuzzy on. Minds.com, for example, uses Minds token, and DLive has Linos, or at least it did when I last checked them. How each site makes use of these is too broad of a topic to get into here. In my experience, it's always been totally optional. I never needed to buy these things. I never needed to mine these things. Sometimes they get awarded to you for certain things. It's up to them. The pros of a blockchain-powered site is it generally can be built to look and feel like a normal website to the end user, who generally might not even need to know any better. You go to a top-level domain like a .com, for example. You use the site like you normally would. Pure difference is in where the data winds up sitting. The cons are, though, that even though the data is encrypted and spread around, if the base .com goes away, you'll likely just succumb to the same kind of thing that Facebook's going through right now and just kind of just not use it. I'm sure there are other pros and cons along the way. I imagine that there's probably some kind of forking thing that can happen. So someone could theoretically take Minds.com and fork it into Minds2.com. I don't know how transferable the blockchain is between these things, to be specific. I don't know. I feel like you have to start with a brand new starting blockchain. Someone please comment down below if you know for sure how that all works, because I'd love to know. The next one I'd like to talk to you about is called Federation. This one is weird, but I think it carries with it the most useful form of decentralization. So please bear with me, it's a bit complex and strange. A federated app is kind of like a peer-to-peer program. If you're an old millennial like me, you'll probably remember things like Kazaa and SongSpy and BearShare or LimeWire, those kinds of things. It's almost similar to a degree. Basically, you're all running a copy of Kazaa, or you're all running a copy of Napster, you know. And even though the data, the files being shared exist on that person's computer, you can download to your own computer the same data, just by the sheer virtue of using the same application that's connected to the same peer-to-peer network. It's almost like that. Torrents are a similar kind of peer-to-peer network as that, but now we're starting to stray away from what Federation is. Basically, several copies of the same app run on several different servers. Instead of being a small part of a bigger picture, like for a blockchain, for example, where the decentralization comes in, everyone has a copy of the data, your copy of the app is just as big a deal as everyone else's copy of the app. It gets a bit tricky, I know, but please try to follow along with me here. I'll try to use an existing example like Mastodon, for example. Let's do that. A Twitter alternative is what Mastodon is. The engineers of Mastodon created this web app that works kind of like a Twitter, but you can host it on your own server. It can sit entirely on its own. Just simply install it on a server and you can log in and use it. It's not too much unlike setting up a forum or something or whatever. If you've ever self-hosted anything before, you can use it just like a Twitter, and users go to your website, they register for an account, and they can post their own Twitter-like content on this, on your server. All right, with me so far? So one of the cool benefits of self-hosting is you can dress it up however you want. You can adjust how the styling looks. You can put your own personal branding on it. It effectively becomes your own instance, doing your own things with your own community. Where the interesting magic happens is it relies on a protocol called ActivityPub. That allows your version of the app to be discoverable and interacted with by other versions of the same software on other servers, called the Fediverse. For all intents and purposes, it's the same app. It's the same core engine powering it. But your instance might be a bit more specialized, focus on music or a specific genre of art or something. So you host the instance, for example, on mycoolartsite.com. And people who want a Twitter-like experience but more deeply focused to talk about just art, you can do that on yours and focus on just that. It comes with its own login and user list, its own conversations. As such, you specifically own the data on your server, and everything that goes on with it is your responsibility. On the same side of the coin, someone else's version of the site, their own copy of the site, which might have a focus on movies, and we'll call that like mycoolmoviesite.com, can have their users discover your version of the site, and your users discover their version of the site. There's protocols in place that allow users from both sites to be able to reshare each other's content, and as well as even log in to each other's content using their home base version of the site as the Authentication Gateway. Lost yet? It's weird. I know. It's a bit confusing. But what does all this mean? What it means is you can host your own Twitter alternative like Mastodon, for example, for your own special interest group, like a Gundam Robots discussion board or something, to social media, a small collection of like-minded people, so the discourse typically remains civil and fun and focused, usually. But the door is open for users to discover and interact with your community's content, and your community can interact with someone else's content if they deem it, share-worthy. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but there are things in place to help communities prosper. As you might imagine, being able to just kind of host whatever allows some pretty unsavory characters to host their own version of it too, and kind of might not want to interact with those people. In that case, these things tend to offer a way to blacklist specific instances out of your specific Fediverse, or you can whitelist only specific instances to be a part of your federated universe, or simply opt into not allowing your content to be discoverable at all. So there's lots of control here. There's lots of flexibility while still being connected to a global network of other users from other communities. The pros of a federated software is that it's very, very flexible and offers a really cool protocol, and in my opinion solves a lot of the problem inherent with global social media networks like Facebook right now. There can simply never be a Zuckerberg in the world of federated apps. It's way too split for that to happen. And if, for whatever reason, one instance gets too big, chances are pretty good it's going to get too general, and that's going to annoy enough people to go split off and run their own instance of the software. And then they can interact with however they please if they ever want to, or block each other out. There's lots of control there. The Zuck would not be able to say, hey, Mastodon in its entirety is going to start selling your data or some nonsense like that. It would be up to the individual instance owners to do stuff like that. And then you can make that choice to either stay on that instance or move to someone else's. The cons is that this isn't shared data across a bunch of nodes like a blockchain is. Data is saved on a specific server for that specific instance. But no instance will ever get to be as crazy as Facebook or anything like that, and even if it ever does get too crowded, people will just split off into their own little communities, keeping that data spread just by the natural motions of things. Quick mid-editing injection. Another con is that federation tends to be extremely confusing to new people who are not used to the concept at all. It kind of demands a click or an aha moment, and you really only get that by kind of jumping in head first and trying it out for yourself. This is by far the biggest barrier of entry, in my opinion. So that kind of brings me to the end of this video. Listen, if for whatever reason I got any of this information incorrect or wrong, please feel free to address it in the comments, and I will happily heart and pin useful constructive corrections or even discussions in the comment section of this video. I want to help people discover decentralized internet. I would love to. Mastodon, for example, for Federation is just is just one thing. There's like a YouTube alternative that's federated. There's a Facebook clone that's federated. And you can go log into specific versions of it. It's really, really cool stuff. It might seem complex at first, but it's really, really cool. And I really encourage anyone who might be a little annoyed with how the current internet landscape looks right now to check that out. Just look it up. You just start off with a simple Google search to find a good jumping off point. I might start talking a bit more about internet privacy and owning your data and your internet identity in the future, if you're interested at all. But for now, I'm going to kind of end this here. If you have any questions or comments about blockchain or federation or even just decentralization in general, feel free to address that in the comments section. And I might do a follow-up video answering some of those questions, or whatever follow-up video happens to be. I might put a section at the end of it that addresses some questions from the previous video. We can have a little bit of fun with this. But for now, my name has been Kai. Thank you for joining me on this video. I hope it was helpful in any way, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.